Okay, let's dive in. You've given us this really interesting set of sources looking at something huge, the global AI race.
Yeah, absolutely central stuff. And the sources frame it clearly. This isn't just tech companies competing.
No, it's way bigger, geopolitical,
Yeah.
the US, China, Russia, all in this struggle.
Exactly. It touches on ideology, security, data control, the works. Basically, future economic and military clout.
The whole package, like you said.
Right.
And running through all this material is this core idea. Controlling AI means controlling the future, essentially.
That seems to be the takeaway. So our job here for this deep dive is to unpack what these sources say about the key players.
Right. What are they doing? Where do their strategies collide? And what are the real stakes? Using only the info provided, of course.
And the sources give us a neat structure. Look at each country, then zoom in on the flashpoints where they directly compete.
Sounds good. Let's start with the US. The material really leans into one specific strength they have: semiconductors.
Yes, that comes through loud and clear. The US lead in designing those really high-end chips. That's crucial for the most advanced AI.
We're talking NVIDIA, their H100, the new Blackwell chips, powering things like ChatGPT, Gemini.
Precisely. The sources name those, and also Intel's Gaudi 3, AMD's MI300 series.
Yeah.
Key hardware providers.
And it's not just design, is it? There's that GSPS Act push mentioned.
Right, a big strategic move, boosting manufacturing inside the US, supporting TSMC's plant in Arizona, Intel's in Ohio, securing the supply chain.
Okay, so hardware is one pillar, but then there's the AI models themselves, the software side. The US seems to lead there too.
That's what the sources indicate. Companies like OpenAI, with GPT-4o, Anthropic with Claude 3, Google DeepMind's Gemini 1.5, they're pushing the boundaries.
Their frontier model.
Exactly, and you need massive compute power for that.
Which comes from the cloud giants, right? AWS, Azure, Google Cloud,
Yeah.
providing that AI supercomputing muscle.
Yeah, that infrastructure is key. And the sources even mention open source contributions like Meta's Llama Mate 3 as part of this whole ecosystem.
Okay, now let's pivot slightly. How is this tech being used strategically? The military angle comes up.
It does. The sources detail things like Project Maven, that's AI for analyzing battlefield video feeds, and the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, the JAC, which is about integrating AI across the entire Defense Department.
And there was mention of DIU, DARPA, offset, that's the drone swarm stuff.
Autonomous vehicles, yeah. Plus AI enhancing Space Command and even testing things like LLMs for battlefield translation in real time.
So serious military integration. What about regulation? That's a tricky area.
Very tricky. The sources mention ongoing debates, public-private discussions, draft laws, executive orders.
NIST and OSTP developing standards, focusing on safety, explainability, that kind of thing.
Right. Trying to get ahead of it, but it's complex, and the sources do point out the challenges.
Right.
Well, the obvious legal and ethical minefields, privacy, bias, but also just disagreements on how to regulate, and the constant worry about sensitive tech leaking out.
Okay, so that's the US sketch. Semiconductor strength, leading models, military adoption, and wrestling with the rules.
A pretty dynamic picture.
Now, let's switch gears to China. The sources suggest a very different approach. Chip autonomy and national control seem key.
Absolutely. That drive for their own domestic chips, especially pushed by those U.S. export bans.
And they're having some success. Huawei's Ascend 910B SMIC hitting 7 nanometers.
Significant progress, yeah, despite the hurdles. The sources highlight those as examples.
And it's not just them. There are others mentioned. SpaceMint with RASCV, Zoxin with BioVD6, exploring different paths.
And even alternative tech like graphene, neuromorphic computing,
Yeah.
casting a wide net to find ways around the bottlenecks.
But beyond chips, what really stands out in the sources is how China integrates AI into, everything, especially state control.
Yeah, the scale of deployment is massive. Surveillance tech like facial recognition, Skynet is mentioned specifically.
And using AI for, public policy planning, Tiangong, and city management.
Exactly. Applying AI for societal governance, optimization. It's deeply embedded in their state apparatus, according to this material.
And they have their own LLMs, too, competing with the West.
They do. Baidu's Ernie 4.0, Alibaba's Tongyi Qianwen, Tencent's Hunyuan. The sources list these as major players doing everything from coding to healthcare support.
Now, this concept, military-civil fusion, MCF, that sounds critical.
It is, based on these sources. It's this strategy of basically blurring the lines, taking civilian tech breakthroughs and funneling them directly into military use.
So the PLA's Strategic Support Force uses AI for command, intelligence.
Autonomous drones, even underwater swarm drones, logistics, it's across the board. And the sources even link AI use to cyber groups like APT-41.
Wow, and they're using AI geopolitically too.
Yes, exporting surveillance tech through the Digital Silk Road Initiative, using AI in diplomacy, generating content for the UN, propaganda. It's a tool of statecraft.
But they face hurdles too, right? The sources mention challenges.
Definitely. Those U.S. sanctions are still biting, blocking the absolute cutting-edge chips. Difficulties with things like 5mm production yields because they rely on foreign gear for that.
And international criticism.
Huge criticism over surveillance practices, yeah. And apparently still some issues attracting and keeping the very top global AI talent.
Right, okay. That brings us to Russia. The picture painted in the sources here seems quite focused, mainly military operating under sanctions.
That's the dominant theme. AI for militarization, but constrained by those Western sanctions.
So the applications are things like asymmetric warfare, swarming drones, combat robots like Marker.
Yes, AI-guided missile targeting, battlefield translation, things that give them an edge without needing perhaps the absolute top-tier hardware everywhere.
And cyber weapons too, Ouroboros Cosmic Duker mentioned.
AI-assisted cyber capabilities, yeah. It fit that asymmetric focus.
But domestically, the sources point to real limitations.
Big time. Chip shortages mean they're relying on Chinese components, even smuggling, the sources suggest. They have domestic efforts, like the ELPA CPU or the Cristofari supercomputer. But these are often adapted for specific military training tasks, not broad AI development like you see elsewhere.
So they depend on others.
Strategically, yes. Cooperation with Iran, North Korea is noted, and they rely quite a bit on open source AI models to compensate for what they can't access or build easily themselves due to sanctions.
And what about AI in diplomacy, like China?
More on the offensive side, according to the sources, using LLMs and synthetic media tools to boost disinformation campaigns, create deepfakes in real time.
So the main challenge for Russia is clearly
The sanctions, severe limitations from them, talent shortages, and that heavy dependence on others for the actual components. It really shapes their whole approach.
Okay, so we've got these three distinct paths laid out. U.S. commercial innovation, broad application. China, state control, civil-military fusion, striving for autonomy. Russia, military focus, asymmetric tactics, working around sanctions.
That sums it up well, based on the source material.
Now, the sources pulled this together by looking at the flashpoints, the areas where these strategies really clash head-on.
And the chip wars are, number one, you could argue. It's the most direct confrontation mentioned.
The U.S. restricting export of those key NVIDIA chips, the A100, H100.
Directly impacting China's and Russia's ability to train the biggest AI models. It's a choke point strategy.
And China's response is that huge push for domestic alternatives, Ascend, Kunlun, RASCV, trying to break free.
A massive national effort. While Russia, as we saw, is more focused on just finding ways around the sanctions, smuggling, alternative suppliers.
Okay, flashpoint one, chips. What's next?
Cloud and compute supremacy. Basically, who has the raw processing power?
The U.S. is leading there with giant accessible supercomputers. Frontier, Summit, Aurora, available for researchers and companies.
Yeah, enabling that massive model training. China, meanwhile, is building its own huge infrastructure, CETC cloud. Elion trying to match that capability for its own needs.
And Russia.
Mostly relying on closed, probably military-focused networks, not the same scale of open or commercial compute power.
Got it. Chips, compute, and the third flashpoint.
Data, the fuel for all AI. And the sources describe very different approaches to getting it.
The U.S. leverages its global internet footprint. Data from apps, platforms.
That's huge data sets from its commercial tech giants. China, on the other hand,
is amassing incredible amounts of domestic data, especially through surveillance systems.
Exactly. A different kind of data pool, feeding different kinds of AI models, particularly those linked to state control.
And Russia's data access is described as more limited.
Yeah, hindering their ability to develop really large-scale models, though the sources mention efforts like scraping data from, say, war zone footage. Still, it's a constraint.
So if you compare them across these points based on the sources, U.S. has the edge in commercial processors, broad investment, integrated military AI, open regulation debates, global data, top cloud infra.
Right, China. State-backed domestic chip push, strategic state investment, deep military fusion, centralized control over rules, massive state surveillance data, building its own cloud fast.
And Russia. Limited processors, military-focused investment, AI for asymmetric defense, state-directed rules, limited state data, closed networks.
Putting it all together, the message from these sources is stark. This isn't just about who builds the best AI, it's a clash of systems.
Geopolitical collision is the phrase used, I think. Different ideologies, political systems, economic models, all betting on AI for future dominance.
Yeah, fundamentally different bets.
So what's the final outlook presented in this material? Where is this heading?
Well, it suggests the U.S. strategy relies on open innovation, commercial scaling leading the way.
Okay. While China's path looks more like algorithmic authoritarianism, using AI for state control, backed by that huge data access.
That's the framing. I'm Russia. Prioritizing AI as a weapon for asymmetric disruption, psychological warfare, punching above its weight technologically.
And the sources end with a pretty profound thought about the future battlefield.
Yeah, becoming algorithmic, invisible, hyper-personalized. It's a chilling idea.
Which leads to that final, really powerful question the material leaves you with. Could AI decide not just how wars are fought, but maybe if they happen, reshaping civilization itself?
It really reframes power, doesn't it? Moving from just physical might to who controls the algorithms, who controls the information flow.
Well, thank you for walking us through the source material. It certainly gives a very clear, if complex, view of this global AI competition.
Absolutely. Lots to think about there for you, the listener. How this technology isn't just changing gadgets, but potentially the whole global order, just as these sources suggest.